Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to the second part of the Quran. This time it is the Quran, the book of signs. Now, many people have a look at the Quran over the years and have received so many blessings from reading it. So much has changed in their lives by reading the Quran. And the Quran is not just a book of science, it's a book of signs. You see, many people always say, they'll pick up the Quran and they say, the Quran is a book of science, but it's a book of ayahs. And in those ayahs are signs. And in those signs are light. And then that light is hope. And then that hope is a future. So when we look at the Quran, it is filled with so much more than just being a book of history or a book of information of what happened in the past. But it's also a book of information of what is going to happen right now and in the future. Now, many times I speak to young people and they say, oh, I'm living for today. There's no such thing as living for today. You either live for the past or you live for the future. Because the moment, this moment that you're talking about, I live for today, has already gone. As you've said, it is now part of history. So we can only live for the future. And the Quran is a book of the future. It tells us how to live for the future and what to do and how to plan for things that are coming. So the Quran is, in fact, a book of signs. And signs tell us what is coming. When you're driving your motor car or driving a motorbike or a bicycle or whatever transport you take, you see along the road, you see signs. These signs tell you what speed to drive at, whether there's a traffic light coming up ahead, whether you must turn to the left or turn to the right. And the Quran is also telling us the same thing. It is signposts telling us what is about to happen or what will take place in the future. In the Quran, in chapter 22 and verse 70, it says, do you not know that Allah knows all that is in the heavens and on the earth? Verily, it is all in the book. And which book? In the Encyclopedia Britannica? No, it is in this book, the Holy Quran. Verily, that is easy for Allah. It is easy for Allah to put everything there is to know about life in this small book. This book has everything that you need to know to survive in. It's your survival guide. It is the book of signs. It is the book that shows you how to go left and how to go right, how much weight you should have and how much weight you shouldn't have. When you go on an aircraft, they give you a certain amount of weight that you're allowed to carry on hand luggage. They have demarcations of where you must sit on the aircraft. They tell you when you must climb on and when you must climb off. And so we have the book of signs that has demarcations telling you how to pray, where to pray, when to pray, what you must do before you pray, how to live your life, how to affect other people, how to increase your hope. So the Quran is a book of signs, as well as other information it contains, and it also tells us about what the shape of the earth is like, what the human development goes through in its stages. There's much information in the Quran that we can learn from. So today we're going to take, yet again, a bird's eye view of the Quran. There are many great scholars, like Dr. Zakir Naik. There are great scholars who have gone into detail about information and science in the Quran. And today I'm not going to spend too much time in going to immense detail on the sciences of the Quran or the signs of the Quran. I'm just going to give you a bird's eye view. And the first bird's eye view we're going to fly over, or the area that we're going to fly over in the Quran, is what does the Quran say about the shape of the earth? Remember, during the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, people believed that the earth was flat. In fact, the Bible believed and promoted and propagated the fact that the earth was flat. You could see one end from the other. This is what the Bible so clearly said. And when we come to the Quran, we find that it has a different idea of what the earth looked like. Have you not seen how Allah merged the day into night and merged the night into day, says chapter 31, verse 29. The use of the word merged emphasizes a slow, gradual change. It didn't happen all at once. And this is not possible if the earth was flat. Could you imagine if this was the earth and this was the sun rising? As soon as it came up, the whole earth would be light. And as soon as it went down, the whole earth would be dark. But it specifically says that there was a gradual change. So this shows us in the Quran that they had an understanding, even at that time, or the people who read the Quran at that time realized that the earth could not be flat. It had to be rounded. The second thing we're going to have a look at is how the Quran speaks about planets, and specifically one planet that we see almost every night in our night sky, and that is the moon. Where does the light of the moon come from? You see, the early civilizations thought that it had its own light, that it was light on its own, that somehow it had its own power or energy source, just like the sun does. And so in the Quran it says, blessed is the one who placed the constellations in the heavens and placed therein a lamp and a moon reflecting light. A moon reflecting light. Now, none of the early writers of Christian theology, Jewish theology, had any idea of what the moon was. You know, sometimes our children, when we talk to our children, we say to them, the moon is made of cheese. And we know this is nonsense. The Quran knew it because it was written by the one who created the moon. It was written by the one who put the sun in orbit. So he knows that it is reflecting light. So in the chapter 25, verse 61, where it says that the moon is reflecting light, it can only possibly be Allah who wrote that. And we know that it is accurate. Today we know this to be true. Sometimes in the city, when you look, you see this beautiful red moon rising. Sometimes it's a yellow, different colors. And it's amazing. You sit there and you look there and you go, it's amazing that it can reflect the light so beautifully. When the sun is referred to as a lamp, it is only used to describe the illumination that the sun is giving to the moon. So we don't, no way do we believe that the sun is a lamp. It's just saying that as you would light a lamp, if you had to take a lamp and switch it on, and you have to put your hand there, you would see the reflected light all over your hand. And that's what it was showing, that as a lamp is switched on, it reflects the light of the moon. So nowhere it says we believe that the sun is a lamp. The next thing that we see in the Quran, or the next subject we're going to look in the Quran is the sun stationary? You see, many civilizations believe that the sun stood in place and it didn't move, and that somehow everything else moved around the sun. So we have a look what the Quran says. And here we see in chapter 21, verse 33, it says, the one who created, that is talking about Allah, the one who created the night, the day, the sun and the moon, each one spinning on its own axis, traveling in its own orbit, in other words. So this is something they could not possibly have known at that time. This is something that we only know in our relatively young history of astronomy. We've realized how the planets move in their orbits and how they circle each other. Here it is evident that the sun and the moon both rotate, and further, the celestial laws of orbit movement is made so perfectly in balance that it holds these planets in place, that they don't move off on their own orbits and do their own thing, that they're bound by law to stay within the confines of their orbit that they are set into. This is amazing. You know, the chaos theory, where everything was just random and it just exploded and everything came into shape, it could not possibly be like that. Because if we look at the order and the structure of the planets, we look at the order and the structure of the universe, it is just bewildering to think that it could be random. There was a great thought that went behind the creation of this universe. And even when we look at the ocean, you know, I'm a person who loves the sea. I do a lot of surfing and a lot of water sports, and I keep a balance in life. I believe that you need to have a healthy mind and you need to have a healthy body, and you need to exercise them well. And you also need to exercise your soul, which means you need to spend time in doing things of Allah, doing dawah, reading the Quran, studying, doing as much as you can. But if you look at salt water and fresh water, do they mix? You know, I spend a lot of time in the ocean, and sometimes I deliver yachts from one country to another, and I go through the ocean and I find fresh water in the ocean. Now, it might surprise you that there's fresh water in the ocean, but there are areas where you actually see a divide in the ocean between fresh water and salt water. In the middle of the ocean, there are these natural springs that come out of the earth, and you can scoop the water in the ocean and drink fresh water. And next to it, not even a few meters away, is salt water, and yet these two don't mix. This is amazing. And this we find in the Quran. In the Quran it says in chapter 25, verse 53, Allah is the one that has let two free seas, one sweet and palatable, and the other salty and bitter. He placed therein a barrier between them, a partition that is forbidden to be passed. In other words, if you put two liquids together, two similar types of liquids together, and you put them together, they quite easily gel together. But somehow, salt and sweet water are prevented from mixing. And this is remarkable. This phenomena is observed in various locations around the world. It's seen in estuary systems, where the salt water and fresh water meet, and where it's a breeding ground for many young fish especially with the fish that come from the ocean, larger fish, they'll come into the estuary and they will spawn so that their babies have a chance to survive. And so we see that even in these estuary systems, the salt water and the fresh water separate from each other. The regions of the Nile River where they meet the Mediterranean Sea, for example, you see that especially there's a separation, there's a special separation that has taken place there. Even in the Gulf Stream, you find the same thing happening. So many parts throughout the world, we find that salt water and fresh water do not mix. And there's this great separation. In the country that I come from, in South Africa, we have what is called the Cape Point. And at the Cape Point, you can stand on this rock and you can see where the two different oceans meet each other. And there's a separation that prevents even two oceans of the same kind from mixing. Where you have the dark blue ocean and a light blue ocean. And they stop. There seems to be a wall that is built the whole way down. And even if you dive in the water, you see the separation. So Allah has separated even the oceans and kept them in separation from each other. All life begins in the water. And all life begins from the water. And this we understand. You know, many people don't like this theory of that all life comes from water and all life has water and began with water. And we read in the Qur'an where it says in chapter 21, verse 30, that it says, and we made every living thing from water. So every living thing was made from water. Now the human brain is made up of more than 80% water. The body is made up of so much water. We know that water is essential to survival. When you talk for 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 minutes, what is it that you want the most? You want a glass of water. You don't worry about food or chocolates or sweets or salads or anything like that. What do you want? You want water. We desire water so much, and water has become so important to our lives. And so many people have looked at different theories about evolution. According to Darwin and the theory of evolution, it claims that all life began in the sea or the ocean. Can you imagine that in a desert the Arabs would have come up with an idea of that life came from the ocean or from the water? Where they had obviously no understanding of what was going on in the ocean or the water, and water was so scarce in their area. So they wouldn't have had understanding of this. This had to have come from Allah and been placed there. It wasn't something that the Arabs would have had any knowledge of. And this would have totally been guesswork that if they had to put something like that, and they wouldn't have known how to phrase it or how to put it in. So all living things as we know today, and we so accurately know, come from water. And so we know that everything is put together in water. There's also another thing that we see when we look at a world map, that all the continents were one consolidated landmass. At one time, they were all one form of landmass. And over the years, what is called continental drift. And the countries started to separate away from each other and broke apart from each other. And you had this section and that section going in different directions. Now, in the Quran, in chapter 79, verse 30, it says that, and the earth he extended after that, and then drew from it water and pastures. Here we see that there was a separation of land coming up, some of it rising, some of it lowering, some of it moving apart. And so we had this change in the continents, the way the shape of the earth was, the way the lands separated from each other and drifted apart from each other. Isn't this exciting? Isn't it amazing when you start looking at the Quran and seeing all these things? Well, we're going to take a short break, and after that we'll come back and we'll have a look further in the amazing discoveries in the Quran. Welcome back, and now we're going to continue having a look at the signs in the Quran. Like I said, there are many signs that have been given to us to help us understand what is going to take place or what is going to happen in the future. And so when we look at signs, normally the signs will depict something that is going to remind us of that event or that thing that's going to happen. For example, when you cross a road, you see a little sign above you and it says, has two little children or walking across the road. You know that that's where children cross the road. It tells you what happened in the past to depict what's going to happen in the future or what should happen in the present. And so many signs that we see, road signs, are to tell us what happens in the past and what's going to happen in the future. Now, when it comes to the Quran, we have signs of things that they did not see in the past. They did not know these things. These things can only be signs of what we would eventually end up finding out in the future or find out today. For example, we had a look at how the Quran tells us that life began from water and that everything is made up of water. We saw then relating to water how all the land masses used to be together in one solid form, and they slowly separated, what we now know as continental drift, which again the Quran attests to in chapter 79, verse 30, which we looked at, and how even the earth was able to draw away from each other and pull away from each other, and how land masses rose and fell to create different continents. And this was all done at that period of time and to be a sign for us so that we would know in the future that this book was not written by man and that it was indeed written by Allah Ta'ala. But one of the other things that we see when we look at land mass and we see the separation of land masses is that we often see that plant species from one continent to another are similar but different. You know, in South Africa, we have certain foliage that grows there, certain plants that grow there that don't grow in other parts of the world. But you go to India, or you go to America, or you go to Spain, or you go to Turkey, you find similar plant species, but you can see they're related, but they're slightly different. And we wonder how these plant species survived, how they managed to reproduce and continue to survive. And many people haven't known anything about it. Zoologists have had very little understanding of animals. People who study plant life have had very little understanding about plant life. And it's only in the recent years, in the last few 20, 30, 40, 50 years, that we really started to understand plant life and animal life and geography properly. So when we come across verses in the Quran that seem to explain modern discoveries, it is quite remarkable. For example, for plant life, in the Quran chapter 20, verse 53, it says that Allah, who sent down rain from the skies, and with it brought forth various types of plants in pairs. So we see that it talks about pairs of plants. Now, what is so remarkable about this is that for many years, people didn't know how reproduction took place within plant life. And now we understand by having massive microscopes, we can look at things in the smallest detail. We think of macro microscopes being huge microscopes that can look at tiny things that are taking place. We now understand how reproduction takes place. And those of you who study biology or are studying biology or have biology as a subject, you'll know that how magnificent, how intricate this reproduction is of plants and how there needs to be a pair of everything. Here the Quran mentions a scientific fact that was not discovered until much later, that there are in fact amongst the plant kingdoms male and female types. We didn't know this before. And so as we look at plant species, we think of bigger plants, we think of trees and how a small little tree is able to grow into these big, huge, massive oaks. And also when you think of trees, you think of things that grow off trees like apples and fruit, like oranges and apples and pears and plums and peaches, these beautiful fruits. And they too work pairs. In the Quran, it says in chapter 13, verse 3, it says, and all the fruits Allah placed on earth 2 pairs of. So there are 2 pairs of even the fruits. And this is something that we had very little understanding of. And now let's have a look at the biggest of the animals, or the most dangerous animal, and that is the human being. What does the Quran say about the human being? Now, there's so much research that's been done and so many talks that have been done that go into great detail on how the Quran speaks so accurately about the human development. In the 22nd chapter of the Quran, verse 5, it says that there's a resting place appointed within the womb where the developing part of the human rests. And it goes into detail about how it will cling onto this part and it will develop and go through different stages and what the stages of the development look like in the development of the fetus inside the mother. And so we have so much detail being given there, scientific detail that we now find correlates with what modern medicine says, what modern science says. And this could not possibly have been understood at that time with the primitive understanding they had of medicine at that time. You see, the Quran goes into specifics, explaining what it looked like, what the fetus looks like, the development. And like I said, today we are just doing a bird's eye view. We're not going into detail. But what we have the Quran explaining these things, these developments. We see that the Quran has been a record, almost like a media report of what we would later discover. It's going to tell us of what things are going to take place in the future, what discoveries will take place in the future. I'm quite sure that when the early people who read the Quran, before we had the scientific information that we have today, read it, they thought, these guys are crazy, these Muslims are crazy. Look how they describe a child being developed in the mother's womb. This is nothing like what we believe. And so what we find is today is we have an accurate record of what really happened during those stages of development in the mother. When back in those days, no one had a clue what really happened. It was just all guesswork. For example, today we also have a record of information, and we have this through the media. Every time we switch on the television, we watch what happened that day, and that information is given to us. And so we can be told what is happening in our times. Just like when we read the Quran, we have the Quran, it is a book of science and it is a book of signs. It's a book of miracles, it's a book of the future, it's a book of the past, it's a book of the present. So this book is not just a book of science. In fact, some people would say that it's not a book of science at all, but it is a book of signs. Like I said, the Quran is a book that teaches us over 6,000 different signs. Different signs that will tell us how to live our life. 1,000 of these signs deal specifically with science. They deal with knowledge of science. And it proves that whether something is correct or incorrect. You see, many of the other books that you read, whether it be the Bhagavad Gita, the Book of Mormon, or whether it be the Bible, the Old Testament, or the Torah, many of the descriptions there about science and geography and medicine were terribly inaccurate. It described insects totally in the wrong way. But when we come to the Quran, we find that it goes into immense detail, making sure that it is standing up for scrutiny, that we can investigate it and have a look at it and see whether it relates to what modern science says or not. And not just what modern science says. We know there's so many other verses where the verses in the Quran talk about the mountains having pegs, and that the mountains are actually pegged into the ground. And that we have discovered recently, and we've been able to understand and identify. There are so many, like I said, there are over 6,000 signs on which 1,000 of these can be backed by science. Many of the others deal with other aspects that we will only discover in the future. Now, as you go through the Quran and as you discover the signs of the Quran, let the Quran guide you. Don't you guide the Quran, let the Quran guide you. And in upcoming episodes, we'll have a look at that specific topic. Are we guiding the Quran, or is the Quran guiding us? Assalamu alaikum, and see you again soon.